The European Qur'an Project is a 10 million euro taxpayer-funded project that seeks to portray the Quran as one of the foundational pillars of Western civilization. The European Union is spending hundreds of millions of European taxpayers' money on a wide variety of other revisionist projects. For example, the evolution of Sharia, the hijab as a means of women's empowerment, how Western democracies can be more inclusive of Islam, but because it is presented as moderation, the EU elite buy into it. The second aspect is the use of woke ideology. They present the hijab, for example, as a symbol of women's empowerment. Tell the EU elite, we need your money, and your money is going to help bring about peaceful coexistence in the long run, when actually it's, helping the organization like the Muslim Brotherhood to get their tentacles even further into European institutions.
Yeah, well, many MEPs are starting to raise the alarm bells over the funding of these. And you mentioned that French intelligence is very well aware of the risk posed, yet they're allowing Europe's largest mosque to be built in Strasbourg, very in close proximity to European Union's second capital. How are they letting those two things go on when they know the risk? Governments are splurging taxpayer cash on Islamic projects. The EU, which still receives British money, has splurged more than 10 million euros on the so-called European Qur'an, a 6-year project critics are calling historic revisionism, a drive they fear to erase the Christian foundations of Europe and replace them with Islam. Brits were shocked earlier this year when I revealed the taxpayer-funded NHS Muslim network had been encouraging NHS staff to convert to Islam. But it seems Britain isn't alone. The EU has spent more than 2 million euros on a project called Islam and Islamophobia in an age of populism, still focusing on the far right then, rather than increasing Islamist threats. 2.5 million euros were set aside for mapping the evolution of Sharia. Europeans are sounding the alarm that some of this funding could get into the hands of the Muslim Brotherhood. Journalist for the Middle East Forum, Jules Gomes, is here to explain why he's worried about the direction we're taking. So what is the European Qur'an?
The European Qur'an Project is a 10 million euro taxpayer-funded project. The money is coming directly from the European Commission, which is the primary executive body of the European Union. And this is a project that seeks to portray the Quran as one of the foundational pillars of Western civilization, along with the Bible. The project is going to be theologically, historically, and ideologically revisionist, and basically, whitewash the problems with Islam and the problem with fundamentalist or militant political Islamic ideology.
But is there any truth in that? Is Islam foundational to the creation of Western civilization in Europe?
Well, scholars would argue that, serious scholars of Islam who are not into historical revisionism would argue that Islam has played more of a negative impact in Europe, primarily by conquest over, many centuries. And therefore, there is no validity in saying that it is culturally one of the bedrocks of Western European civilization. Because, I live here in Rome, and I go around, and this is like an open-air museum. What I see is a clear witness to biblical civilization, the Judeo-Christian civilization, the Greco-Roman civilization, and there's very little evidence that Islam has had any impact. And similarly, you go to any European city, you will witness the same thing. So tourists don't come to Europe in hundreds of thousands. I mean, we're having an overload of tourists at the moment to, go to see mosques or go to see Arabic manuscripts. No, it's very clearly Judeo-Christian.
And how much funding have they had?
They've had 10 million euros. And this is just
Wow.
for the Qur'an project, the European Qur'an project. The story that I did demonstrates that the European Union is spending hundreds of millions of European taxpayers' money on a wide variety of other revisionist projects. For example, the evolution of Sharia, the hijab as a means of women's empowerment, how Western democracies can be more inclusive of Islam. Then there is the canonization of Quranic traditions. So, all these academic projects that would be fine if a department of Islamic studies in a particular university was undertaking with no taxpayer money whatsoever. The European Union is now funding it. And basically, the problem with this, part of the problem is not just the funding, but the involvement of radicals. And that is very, very scary. If I may add to this, Nicholas, I'm an academic and I taught Islam in Britain. My area of expertise is, of course, the Hebrew Bible. But what scared me, and this is directly relevant to this project, is that over centuries, even till today, unlike biblical studies in universities all over Europe, all over the world, Islam has consistently rejected the historical critical method. So the kind of rigorous, almost devastating, aggressive approach that we as scholars take to the biblical text, the Quran is treated as if it just dropped from heaven, and that is very, very sinister in my opinion.
But why would a European elite want to fund these projects that are so pro the spread of Islam? I mean, on the face of it, European elites are very pro-LGBT, they're pro-trans, they're pro-abortion. But then on the other side, they seem to be propagating this religion that's antithetical to all of that.
And that's a very, very good question. And there's a wide variety of responses. One, of course, being that European elites see Muslims as the underdog, and therefore their kind of critical theory, the whole, ladder of intersectionality, Muslims are definitely on that ladder, along with LGBT, people and other oppressed minorities. But the more dangerous issue here, and a report has just come out last week, brought out by two very good scholars on unmasking the Muslim Brotherhood, is that groups like the Muslim Brotherhood in Europe present their concerns and try to, and basically deceive the European Union elite by talking. There are two aspects. One is called vasatia, that is the principle of moderation, which is actually a tactical strategy to gain ground until the whole of Europe is Islamized. But because it is presented as moderation, the EU elite buy into it. The second aspect is the use of woke ideologies. So the presenters talked about this a couple of days ago in the press conference. They present the hijab, for example, as a symbol of women's empowerment. They talk about inclusion. They talk about equality, and the rhetoric is very, very much critical Marxist theory. And these two combine to basically tell the EU elite, we need your money, and your money is going to help bring about peaceful coexistence in the long run, when actually it's, helping the organization like the Muslim Brotherhood to get their tentacles even further into European institutions.
Yeah, well, many MEPs are starting to raise the alarm bells over the funding of these projects. And I'm just going to list out for our viewers a couple of these projects. So we've had nearly 2.3 million euros to study Islamism, Islamophobia in the age of populism. So that sounds a little bit to me like a propaganda exercise against some of the worries about the problems that are linked to immigration. There's 2 million euros that's been spent on the inclusion of Muslims in democracies, which you mentioned before. There's 2.5 million euros on mapping the evolution of Sharia.
Yep.
I'm not, that sounds quite worrying, I'm sure, to our viewers. 2.3 million euros on animals in the philosophy of Islam.
Yes.
And then 2.5 million euros on the role of Sufism in the creation of Islam. That's a lot of money for a continent that is in a terrible place economically, and for populations that are being asked to cut back on their welfare, on their healthcare. Again, I can't understand the iteration. It seems to me, is this funding an almost declaration that the European elite are not willing to walk back the mass immigration model?
Well, you're right. There have been European MEPs who have raised questions about this funding. In fact, there was a question in the European Parliament a few months ago about the funding of these projects. I think the answer is that the European Union elite are continue to be a really very delusional, bitten by the virus or infected by the virus of wishful thinking that, if that peaceful coexistence is possible, that radical Islamism is a very small proportion of the vast majority of peaceful Muslims, and that if only more money. See, the principle is throw money at them, and maybe, it'll work out because we can resolve these issues economically. And that seems to be, from what I read and from the people I talk to, that seems to be the thinking behind throwing more and more money at these projects. Also, the idea that, we have funded, for example, academic projects in Christianity and Judaism for decades now, and it's time to right the balance. These minorities really need more magnifying glasses on their rich traditions. And if we can do that a little more, we can bring about some sort of a balance and redress the perceived injustices.
But they do seem to recognise that there is a bit of a problem, because when people criticise them about the European Qur'an, I think we'll need to talk a little bit more about that, because it's a little bit unclear what the end goal is. Will they actually come out with a European version of a Qur'an? But when they do say, when they try and explain why they're doing it, that they want to have a more Europeanized version of Islam. So it seems to me that there is a bit of a tacit recognition that at its extremes, Islam isn't compatible with the West.
You're right. You're absolutely right. Obviously, they won't come up with an Europeanized version of the Quran, because these kinds of initiatives have backfired very severely in France, for example, where massive, very big groups like Miligorus refused to sign on to the principles, the Charter of Principles, saying that they will not talk about genital mutilation or conversion or, against LGBTQ people or jihad, for example. So yes, there is, I would use the word cognitive dissonance here. There is so little there's so little academic and historical awareness. It is important to remember, I think, that most of the European Union elite suffer from severe historic amnesia. And not just historic amnesia, but also historical embarrassment. We were colonialists once upon a time, and we need to repent of that. So there are all sorts of streams that feed into this whirlpool of cognitive dissonance.
Well, you mentioned France, and you've done another article about a survey that was quite big news about the attitudes of young French Muslims. And it doesn't seem like this push to Europeanize Islam will work if we take France as our case study. I've got here that 38% of young French Muslims are pro an Islamist regime. 32% follow the Muslim Brotherhood. 57% of those aged 15 to 24 believe that Sharia law comes before French law. And 55% of 15 to 24-year-olds refuse contact with the opposite sex. Now, you mentioned Muslim Brotherhood before. Are these the kind of values that they preach? Who are they? What's their goals?
Absolutely. These are the values that they preach. The Muslim Brotherhood is probably the biggest and the most sinister Muslim umbrella organization, if I can call it that, probably in the world, but basically the organization that has got its stranglehold on Europe and the European Union. They have infiltrated almost every aspect of European society, government, the bureaucracy, and they do it, as I said, through vasatia, talking about moderation and then using woke ideology. The concern here is that the way this is now being spun, this survey that talked about not just the increase in the Muslim demographic in France from 0.5%, I think, in 1985 to 7% of the population in France in 2025, but also almost a threefold radicalization of that population. And the way this is being spun, for example, there have been court cases against, legal cases against the pollsters, the company that conducted this poll, accusing it of bigotry, of skewing the figures, etc. But the rector of the Grand Mosque of Paris, who comes across, says he's a moderate, he says, look at young Roman Catholics in France, particularly the traditionalists. They are getting very, very devout, very rigorous, very rigid in their faith. So if this is happening among Roman Catholic young people in France, why are you then pointing fingers at Muslim youth? And you say this is an increase in devotion and religious practice when it comes to Roman Catholic traditionalist youth. But then you're saying this is an increase in radicalization. So the way that he and others are spinning it, these people are just getting more religious. The first generation immigrants weren't so religious. They were much more relaxed about their faith. These people are taking their faith much more seriously. But you bigots, you European bigots, Western white bigots, are basically saying that we are being Islamized, radicalized, etc., etc. And this sort of is being supported by the left. So, for example, there are parliamentarians, the far left parliamentarians in France, are actually now aligning themselves with this court and saying that, the pollsters are really need to be sued for this.
Wow. I mean, there's an argument across Europe to ban the Muslim Brotherhood. In Britain, it doesn't get much traction. And I think it's a bit fairer here because we haven't banned really any groups other than prescribed terror groups. But in France and Germany, they're talking in Germany about banning the AfD. And in France, they've banned groups like the Génération Identitaire, stuff like that. So why are they so reluctant to clamp down on the Muslim Brotherhood? Are they scared?
That's a very good question. In fact, I think in July there was this massive French intelligence report exposing the Muslim Brotherhood. And again, as I said last week, these two scholars presented an absolutely cracking report, forensic report, on how the Muslim Brotherhood is not just infiltrating every aspect of European life, but it's being funded in massive proportion. Now, why are they reluctant? They are reluctant because the Muslim populations in many parts of Europe are so huge that it's going to be practically impossible to do that. And as you quoted the statistics there, I think nearly 38% of these Muslims in France now align themselves with the Muslim Brotherhood. So that's going to be very difficult. Parliaments in Europe are by and large fractured, whether we're talking about Italy or whether we're talking about France. At the moment you seek to do this, there's a very strong, army of left-wing activists and politicians who stand up against this sort of banning. But thirdly, I think it's pragmatic, because what the Muslim Brotherhood does is, and what many of these organizations do, is they do not exist as a unified corporate body. They have disguised themselves and they take on many, many avatars. Then if you ban the Muslim Brotherhood as such, will continue, because legally on the face of it, there's no prima facie evidence to connect it to the Muslim Brotherhood. So these Islamist organizations have learned the strategy of basically evolving and morphing into different entities. There's no possibility of really destroying all of them if you crack down on the central body. It's not like closing down Palestine or prescribing Palestine action, for example, as we did in England.
Yes, and you mentioned that French intelligence is very well aware of the risk posed, yet they're allowing Europe's largest mosque to be built in Strasbourg, very in close proximity to European Union's second capital. How are they letting those two things go on when they know the risk? I mean, the mosque, there's lots of concerns, aren't there, around funding?
Yes, because the mosque is being primarily funded by Milli Görüş, which is the radical Islamist group in Turkey. I think it runs over 600 mosques all over Europe. It has very close links to President Erdogan. As you rightly said, it's just 6 kilometers away from the Strasbourg Parliament, European Union Parliament building. And there are about 27 legal mosques already in Strasbourg. So why are they allowing it? Good question. Again, I think it comes down to the fact that, not just allowing, but there were councils that even funded a part of the cost towards the building. Again, because there are so few European Parliament members of Parliament who are willing to speak up against this. And the European Parliament itself is severely fractured between leftists who have absolutely no problem, in fact, would love to see more mosques and align with them ideologically, and then this tiny minority of, for want of a better word, right-wing MEPs. You can count them on 10 fingers.
But many people will ask, is this a bad thing? I mean, in Europe, we believe in individual liberty, freedom of religion, and if European Muslims have decided that they want to take a more conservative turn, many could argue that's up to them. But where it comes in is, does that clash with our way of life? Does that clash with the rights of Christians, Jews, and other religious minorities? In areas where they are predominantly Muslim across Europe, where these ideologies of the Muslim Brotherhood have permeated, are there threats to minorities? Are these Muslim populations hostile to other minorities?
Well, absolutely, definitely. You go to, let's call them no-go zones, for want of a better word, and you try to distribute tracts, gospel tracts, for example, or stand on a soapbox and preach the gospel, or hold up a banner saying Jesus is Lord. Oh my goodness, you are going to be in very big trouble. You might probably even be attacked. So there is absolutely no doubt that these enclaves are posing a serious threat to cohesion, community cohesion by and large. But again, remember that, the very fact that we've been talking about them as elite, the European elite, they don't care. As long they think that these problems are basically confined, they're deluding themselves that these problems are confined to these enclaves, and they delude themselves saying that these enclaves are mostly oppressed first generation or second generation immigrants who are engaging in this because of lack of opportunity. And so they think that, okay, let me give you my own first-hand, when I talk to imams, when I talk to radical Muslims on the ground, their response is, we have democracy in this country, and we are going to make full use of this democracy to take over. And you are letting us do it. They will also, in many cases, use the moral argument. Western civilization is finished. The church is now dead. There is a huge spiritual and moral vacuum, and we are here to fill that vacuum. So, they talk about LGBT, abortion, this sort of thing, and they'll talk about how morally superior they are to decadent European culture. So yeah.
On GB News Originals this week, we've done an interview with Rupert Short, who said that Christians by far and away are the most persecuted religion in the world. Now, Europe up until now has been the Christian safe haven, bastion of Christian civilization. But as you say, the elites don't care when radical Islamists are persecuting Christian people in their own homelands. And so as the Islamic community turns more and more conservative, the risk of this persecution elevates. But you say the elites don't care, so people then look to their religious leaders like the Pope. So far on the conversations about immigration and the rise of Islam, has the Pope lived up to his responsibility, in your opinion?
Well, I cover the Vatican as part of my job, and it is actually scary what the Pope is saying. Pope Leo's rhetoric, as far as I'm concerned now, is far more dangerous than what Pope Francis was espousing, because he's actually, for example, he went to Turkey, he entered the Blue Mosque. Yes, he did pray in the Blue Mosque, big deal, but just across the road, 2 minutes across the road, is the world's biggest Byzantine basilica, Hagia Sophia, which was conquered by Sultan Muhammad II in the 15th century, I think, and then in the 30s or 40s, was it, the Kemal Atatürk, the secularist dictator, turned it into a museum, and in July 2020, Erdogan ordered it reconverted into a mosque. And what did the Vatican do? The Pope Francis uttered just 6 words in Italian. I hear about this and I'm deeply saddened. Period. That was it. No protests whatsoever, even though parts of the Orthodox world were begging Pope Francis to take a stand. And Leo goes to Turkey and doesn't step into Hagia Sophia. He could have done that and sent out a massive signal to the world, even if he had just gone into the mosque, the so-called mosque, forcibly converted, and made the sign of the cross. That would have been such a symbol, of such a subversive symbol, that this still belongs to Christians. But he went on to talk about how in Lebanon, the adhan, which is the Muslim call to prayer, and the church bell, merge in wonderful harmony in praise to God and as a testimony of it. Is Pope Leo so unaware of basic Lebanese history? the recent civil wars, the fact that Maronite Catholics and Orthodox have been driven out by the hundreds of thousands, that Jews have been persecuted mercilessly and dare not go back into many parts of Lebanon, that Hezbollah has taken over and virtually rules the country, one of the most dangerous terrorist groups in the world. And does he not know that the Adhan is the supremacist Islamic call to prayer, which categorically proclaims that Judaism and Christianity are both annulled because the new final prophet, Muhammad, has now come on the scene? Does he not know that the Adhan is also, as Muslim scholars will tell us, a proclamation, a spiritual proclamation over territory, because Islam is a territorial religion. I was in Israel a couple of weeks ago, and they were telling us how, and I knew this from my experience with Indian Muslims, that once Muslims have conquered territory, it is waqf. It belongs to Islam forever. And that is why Hagia Sophia, the Cordoba Mosque, etc., the Cordoba Cathedral, which they want to convert into a mosque, can never go back to Christian control. And this is also part of the Islamic agenda, the conquest of space. But Pope Leo is so delusional that they even gave permission for Muslim scholars to use prayer space in the Vatican Apostolic Library. But by the way, he also talks about how we should not fear, as Christians, we should not fear immigration, even if they are people of another religion.
We're seeing this now, especially with the Anglican Church. I think the Anglican Church has been the most passive of them all. And we're now seeing that Christians across Africa are not wanting anything to do with it anymore. They want a bit more muscularity in their religion. And I think you'll know a lot more about Christian history than I do, but has Christianity's passivity ever been met with respect by Islam?
No, because Islam, and this has partly to do with the Middle East culture, Islam is a religion of power, of dominance, of hegemony, and passivity signaling peace is seen as a sign of weakness. It's also important to understand, and this is what the Vatican or the Anglican Church or many of these liberal denominations simply don't understand, that when you and I talk about peace, we mean something very different to what peace means in Islamic theology. And Robert Riley has a wonderful book on the perils and prospects of Muslim-Catholic dialogue, and he warns about using the word peace superficially, because he said when a Muslim talks about peace, it means, you submit to Islam. You're now in the house of war. You convert and submit to the house of peace, Darul Islam, and we will have peace. But if you refuse to do that, we cannot be at peace with you. So what they mean, but when they say peace, they mean submission to Islam. When Pope Leo or the Archbishop of Canterbury talk about peace, basically they mean, having a nice chat with a nice cup of tea with cucumber sandwiches at Lambeth Palace.
It almost sounds like you're arguing for a Christian version of Donald Trump's peace through strength. And I think the EU and the UK, in a way, it's understandable that they're trying to find a way for Christians and Muslims to live together. And if you think about different civilizations around the world where they do, Albania seems to be pretty 50-50, but the Balkans, again, every now and then the tension rises up, Bosnia as well. The only place that I can think of, and hopefully you can talk a little bit about this, where the two religions seem to have their place and it's settled, is Russia. What's the difference in the Russian approach to managing the Islamic republics and the Christian civilization which dominates?
I think the difference is that the Russians are proud of their Russian Orthodox heritage and history and culture. The Russian Orthodox Church almost functions as a kind of state church. So there is that very clear signal, which of course the Church of England could have done, but it refuses to do. I would put the peace, the Donald Trump peace of strength, I'd nuance it slightly. What I would hope is a genuine revival in Christianity in Europe. What we have seen, and this is a positive note, we have seen hundreds of thousands of Muslims converting to Christianity, for example, in Iran. And I know this from first-person testimony. I used to preach at many Farsi congregations, Arabic congregations in England when I lived in England. And, it was wonderful to see Muslims from all over the world who have converted to Christianity and are truly living a freer new life in the Lord Jesus Christ and through the power of the gospel. So if the church regained its backbone, preached the gospel, did what it is supposed to do, that would definitely happen in Europe. And I do know that there are pockets in, obviously in England, but also in Germany, for example, in France, this is taking place in a significant manner, of Muslims who have come here, who are disillusioned with Islam, and then see an alternative way of living, through the power of the gospel, and turn to Christ. I mean, that is supernatural, of course, but the church does have a role to play here. And the church can only achieve it if it preaches the gospel, if it preaches the uniqueness and the definitiveness of Christ, if it demonstrates how, because of biblical Judeo-Christian values, European civilization was one of the greatest, if not the greatest, in the history of cultures. And it is this culture alone that can, offer true tolerance in the best sense of the word, freedom in the best sense of the word, and a quality of life that you will not find in an Arab country or in Somalia, for example.
Well, thank you so much for that conversation.